There is a oneness about water. The fundamental substance of all living things is protoplasm, and protoplasm is 90% water. The grasses waving in the wind of a spring meadow are wands of water. We're water. Most of us think of the living world as complex and diverse. The differences, say, between a giant redwood tree and an earthworm are so striking, it's hard to accept that all life is made up of 6 chemicals: water, carbohydrates, fats, adenosine phosphates, proteins, and nucleic acids. These combine in some mysterious way we can't imitate to make protoplasm. And as we said, water is the major constituent. It is everywhere water, in every shape and fashion life has to offer. The greatest reservoir, of course, is in the form of salty oceans, which cover 71% of the Earth's surface. But here we're concerned with inland water, the fresh water that falls from the clouds and restores all growing things, the water that courses through our rivers and creeks and fills our springs and lakes. We say fresh water with irony. On a planet literally brimming with water, man now finds that his most critical natural need is water, unsalted, unpolluted water, for drinking and for agriculture and industry. Water, water everywhere, the ancient mariner said, nor any drop to drink. But let's be positive and for a moment pretend that America is still a great green pasture in untrammeled wood, and watch as water works its wonders upon the land. It almost always begins with clouds. Clouds are the great aqueducts of nature. They're really suspended particles of cool water which rise from steamy vegetation in misty lakes as well as the vaporous seas. Condensation causes the clouds to release their burden, and the raindrops ride to the earth on microscopic specks of dust. The clouds roll and rumble across the continents with their enrichment, driven by the wind, which is driven by the sun, which is driven by the star maker. This is called the hydrologic cycle, the coursing of water through the air and earth and sea and back again. It is an ancient and inexorable process. almost as old as the rocks of Manitoba, which have stood since they first froze into position 100 million years or so after the Earth was wrenched from the sun. It was the cooling of the lava and the solar and lunar tides that tugged and pulled against the oscillating Earth that made the mountains, and it was the cooling of the first rains that filled the oceans where life began. So the first rains were tumultuous, in keeping with the cataclysmic explosion that created our planet. The Earth has continued its violent ways, piling one geologic upheaval upon another with an Old Testament grandeur, spewing forth mountain chains and reducing them to rubble, drowning the continents in floods to match Noah's, and locking the land in ice. Within man's own time, we have known nature's extremes in droughts and deluges and earthquakes. Nature lives in motion. Life cannot sustain itself without energy, and energy is friction. But nature is not always convulsive and dramatic and antagonistic. It also has its quieter, cooperative side. There are more spring showers than storms. And while it's true, as Lauren Isley puts it, that there is magnificent violence hidden in a raindrop, its patient erosion of a mountain means minerals and nourishment for the valley below. Roy Bedichek, the Texas naturalist, once observed that this was a way of life worked out as part of nature's plan. He wrote that, as in an individual life, there is a principle of unity and symmetry always active, always harmonizing and constraining anarchic forces, bringing them into due subordination. So, in the whole of nature, as diverse and contradictory as it may appear in any partial view, there is a dark, inscrutable workmanship that reconciles discordant elements. In other words, 90% of nature's performance is a slow and sure harmony. It was this deliberate quality of nature, Bedichek believed, that makes men close to the soil so soft in their speech and slow in their movements. Beautifully earthbound, they are out there with the elements, moving to the slower tempos of growing grasses and running brooks, while we in the unnatural clots called cities are keyed up to the breaking point. Out in the verdant valleys and rich deltas, where the commerce of man has not intruded, friction is replaced by the slower processes of growth and augmentation, diminution and decay, and growth again. The April rains perk up the quick grasses, which in turn die and make food for next season's foliage. The woods are resonant with nature's fertility, where the death and decay of one plant is the resurrection of another. This balance bridges one form of life to another. Without green plants, which provide most of the Earth's oxygen, animals and insects couldn't breathe, and without plants, we and the grasshopper would go hungry. All this growing and dying enriches the soul as well as the soil. But of course, none of it would be possible without the warmth of the sun and the wonder of water. This old alligator in the Aransas Wildlife Sanctuary is a link in the chain of life that leads us back millions of years to our beginning. He's not a lot different from his ancestors, who ruled these bogs 200 million years ago. An ancient, venerable lineage his, going back to Mesozoic times, when birds, mammals, insects, and flowers first appeared. A very wise man once supposed that infinity was a two-way mirror, that it was as deep in a drop of water as it was in space. James Hutton, the 18th century geologist, understood this. Indeed, he saw time and the wind and raindrops as nature's most persistent instruments of change in the physical world. Raindrops, he observed, have worn the stones of Troy, and blind oblivion swallowed cities up. Mighty Niagaras, they have worked their way through time from Genesis to John Glenn, moving mountains and mustering men to the riverbanks to start civilizations, generating the secret of life to everything they touch. It's not surprising, then, that all brown rivers run to the sea, back to the source. It is in the lagoons and marshes where, in some ancient ancestral evolution, gills turn to lungs and fins to legs, that the salt is restored and the cycle is begun again.